Well, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to remind members that we went the compromise route. We tried that route. We spent last year having many discussions, many negotiations, a lot of debate, and we ended up passing a bill with a widespread consensus that was unfortunately vetoed. Now, that brings us to our current obligations, and our current obligations are defined for us by the Alaska Constitution, which says we have the legislature, by general law, shall establish and maintain a system of public schools open to all children in the state. That's been interpreted by the Alaska Supreme Court. And they said in 1971, this constitutional mandate for pervasive state authority in the field of education could not be more clear. First, the language is mandatory, not permissive. Second, the section not only requires that the legislature establish a school system, but also gives to that body the continuing obligation to maintain the system. Finally, the provision is unqualified. No other unit of government shares responsibility or authority. The state was sued because we didn't adhere to our constitutional obligations. We weren't adequately funding education. There's the well-known court case we've all heard of, the Moore versus State of Alaska in 2007. The Supreme Court found that, yes, adequate funding is a responsibility, a constitutional responsibility of the state. The state in 2012 entered into a settlement agreement to comply with that decision. As part of that decision settlement, the state agreed to increase education funding, among other things. The BSA in 2012, at the time of this settlement, was $5,680. That was in 2012. It was increased to $5,930 in 2017 and by another $30 in 2024. If adjusted for inflation, it should be $7,687, an increase of $1,727. Increase for inflation, it should be over $1,700. Now, according to testimony in the Education Committee by the University of Alaska professor, after adjusting for geographic costs, Alaska's spending is 15% below the national average. We've fallen consistently since 2017. I want to emphasize, this bill does not just increase funding for brick and mortar schools, neighborhood schools, it increases it for charter schools as well as correspondence schools. What are the impacts of the underfunding? We've all heard them. Fairbanks, $16 million deficit, assuming a 680 BSA. They've closed already 6 schools, 4 I know of last year, I think another 2 more this year, increased class sizes, cut over 200 positions. They need a $1,400 BSA to balance their budget. Sitka cuts 18 certified positions last year, needs $1,460 to balance their budget. Juneau closed 3 schools and their district's office building. Without a BSA increase, they have a deficit of $6 million. Nome has a $1.25 million deficit. Kenai projected a $17 million deficit in February and was looking at cutting 85 teachers. Mat-Su Valley district, $12 million deficit, and as of last month was looking at cutting 42 classroom teachers and 31 instructional support positions. With a $680 BSA increase, Ketchikan has a $1.8 million deficit. They're looking at cutting 15 to 18 people. That's on top of the 90 people they've cut in the last 3 years. And of course, Anchorage School District has a $111 million deficit. With a $680 BSA, they still have between a $10 to $15 million deficit. They've already closed 3 schools. The draft budget eliminates 380 positions in my school district. I had a school close in my district this past year, Mr. President. What will ASD do if this passes? They've already told us publicly. They've passed a resolution on it. They will increase the number of teachers. They will retain 337 teachers. They will invest in 31 new educators for high-dose reading and math. They will reduce class sizes significantly. We've all seen class sizes all over the state increase. This is exactly what needs to happen. People say, oh, we need policy. We need some window dressing, open enrollment policy, which we're already doing in every major school district. We need some to change the timelines for when school people can apply for charter schools. The school districts already have those in statute. You want real policy? Cut classroom sizes. That's what this bill does. You want real policy? Put more teachers in the classroom. That's what this bill does. Anchorage School District is going to cut middle school sports. They're going to cut high school sports. They're going to cut librarians. They're going to cut nurses. They're going to cut immersion programs. They're cutting the theater programs. They're cutting choir programs. This bill is a policy bill which will improve our students' educational outcomes. I've heard a lot about accountability, and I'm not sure what people mean when they say they want more accountability. The amendments that I've seen, the proposals that I've seen, don't address accountability at all. In fact, let's talk about accountability for a minute and what we already have. You can go to Title IV of the Alaska Administrative Code, Chapter 6, and you'll find 34 sections on accountability. 34 sections. I'm not going to read them all, Mr. President, but you're welcome to go do that. You can go online, the Department of Education, and you will see they talk about, they have a whole section on accountability. In fact, they talk about the system for school success is Alaska's new accountability system for public schools. And then they have all these different sorts of assessments and standards. They've got the Alaska summative assessments. They've got Alaska's mathematics standards. They've got an English learners page where they have accountability requirements for English learners. They've got universal support, and they've got a complicated formula about how we achieve that. They've got a CSI, Schools for More Rigorous Interventions. That's a comprehensive support and improvement for more rigorous interventions. It's a complicated formula about schools have to apply for that. They've got a CSI on graduation rates. They've got a CSI for the lowest 5% schools. They've got a CSI for TSI, which means Title I schools. They've got another CSI for TSI and ATSI. And then you go to the unfunded mandates, Mr. President. We had a presentation by the Alaska Municipal League. We've got school districts, they've got a report to the Alaska Military Youth Academy about how many kids didn't graduate or how many schools transferred. They got to report to list of students how many are eligible for performance scholarships. They've got to produce disciplinary reports. They've got to file reports on deeds with goals and measures of success. They've got to develop and submit teacher evaluation reports, file annual and quarterly transportation reports. The list goes on and on and on. People want more accountability. Guess who's in charge of creating the regulations? That would be the governor's office. That would be the executive branch. They're the ones who file executive administrative regulations. If they want to change the regulations, if they want to add more regulations, they are free to do that. And in fact, what does that mean? Well, that means our school districts are drowning in accountability. They're required to produce all these reports and documents and papers, and guess what happens to them? They probably get thrown on a shelf or thrown in a garbage bin. Who knows what happens to them, Mr. President? That's not what our school districts need. Our school districts need teachers. They need help in their classrooms. They need smaller school sizes. And that's not even accounting for all the federal requirements they've got to meet. The federal requirements for federal impact aid, for Title I documents, for individuals with disabilities in education. We probably should have a fiscal note to the schools, or be sending them a team of lawyers and accountants and statisticians to help them with all the accountability reports they're already supposed to do. We need to increase funding so that we can get teachers. That's what we need. We need teachers. And you know what? We're losing teachers every year. We can't pay teachers enough. Our teacher salaries have dropped. We have the worst retirement system in the United States, and we wonder why teachers don't want to come here. And if you look at some of the statistics, what you find is the top 5 districts in the state with the lowest teacher ratio have an 87% student proficiency rate in reading. And what do you know? The schools with the lowest teacher retention ratio have the worst reading proficiency standards performance in the state. We do not have an accountability problem. We have a funding problem. We are not funding our schools adequately. And you know, what we see is the kids in the wealthy areas, the kids in the middle class areas, they're doing fine. Charter school kids are doing fine. We have no idea what the correspondence kids, because there was no testing for them. But you know, here's what's happening. In rural Alaska, we have school districts that are facing the decision of, we've got a roof that's collapsing, we've got black mold, are we gonna repair the roof and get rid of the mold and probably have somebody come in and remove the asbestos, or are we going to be able to hire a certified teacher? Those are the decisions that are being made on a regular basis all across Alaska. That's not fair to our kids, Mr. President. We need to hire good, competent teachers and administrators, pay them well, give them good benefits, cut the classroom sizes, give them the support they need. The research shows this is what works. This is what they do in other states. This is what they do in other countries. Finland has one of the best education systems in the world. How do they do it? Well, they get highly qualified teachers, they pay them very well, they give them really good benefits, and then they give them autonomy. and they say, we trust you. You go out and do this. We're not going to require you to fill out 150 different reports and all these other things. That's what we need to do, Mr. President. That's how we solve this problem. Now, I've heard, and I'm only going to talk about this because we've heard it mentioned most times, we can't afford it. Well, we've already talked about our constitutional obligation to do this. But, you know, this is not the first time you've heard me talk about how we can afford it, and it won't be the last. You know, when we as policymakers made the decision, present company not all included here, when the decision was made to give away our resource wealth, which funded our government at 90%, funded 90% of our budget for decades, when that was cut down to 30%, resource wealth now funds 30% of our budget, Mr. President. When that money was given away in the form of tax breaks to the oil industry and tax deductions to the oil industry and other giveaways to the oil industry, that's billions of dollars, Mr. President. People say we can't afford it. We can afford it. We just need to follow our constitutional obligation, our other constitutional obligation, to get the maximum value for our resources. That's how we afford it. Giving away $120 million a year to a Texas billionaire so he can avoid paying corporate income taxes, that's not following our constitutional obligation. You pass that bill, guess what? We can afford a lot of what we're trying to do here. Giving away $500 million for the Willow Project, a project we get in tax deductions, a project for which we get zero royalties, that is, I would argue, not following our constitutional mandate to get the maximum value for our resource. We can afford it. It's going to take political will to do it, Mr. President. Lastly, you know, I've heard some people say, well, you know, we already provide a lot of funding for education. Well, you know what? Alaska's an expensive state. We have monthly utility costs that are 52% higher than the national average. Healthcare costs 60% higher than the national average. Transportation costs 28% higher than the national average. Some people say that increasing the BSA to $1,000 is a joke. And I'm here to tell you, increasing class sizes all across Alaska is not a joke. 11 straight years of out-migration in the state is not a joke. Laying off hundreds of teachers if we don't significantly increase education funding is not a joke. School closures all across Alaska is not a joke. Black mold in our schools and roofs collapsing in Alaska is not a joke. Businesses not being able to find qualified Alaskans that they can hire is not a joke. Our kids' futures is not a joke. We have to pass this bill, Mr. President. Thank you.